Feel Good for Men Who Want Change is a podcast for men who feel left behind or left out and want to grow. We explore healthy masculinity in conversations that don't shame or preach, but talk about how to make positive changes in your own life. Stephen London is a US Army veteran, journalist, and author of Mortal Men, Immortal Warriors, a moving anthology of first-hand accounts from soldiers who served in Afghanistan. A natural storyteller and cultural bridge builder, Stephen now lives in Bulgaria, where he continues to write and advocate for understanding the full costs and complexities of war. Stephen, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim.
No worries. And so you're in Bulgaria at the university you teach at today, right?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Good
Joining
stuff.
you from the library here.
Okay, nice. Well, very topical. And we'll come on to a bit about sort of where you are and how you ended up there. But it'd be great to understand a bit about your background, where you grew up, and take us back to, I guess, the start of your own military journey.
Yeah, definitely. So my military journey began over 20 years ago. So back in 2003, just as Christmas was approaching, so the perfect time for recruiters who were looking to head out on Christmas holiday and kind of end their year. I showed up about a week, I think. Yeah, about December 18th, I think. And I told the recruiter, I'm like, hey, I'm here. I'm ready to sign. And they sent me back with some information, said come back later. I'm like, I'll sign right now. They're like, well, you should probably check this out. But
And had it always been on the cards for you, the military career?
No, not exactly. So probably my first introduction to the military, we have air shows. I don't know if you have air shows over there, probably like the RAF or something, or RAF over there probably has them. So probably my first introduction to the military would have been when I was about 10. And I remember seeing a recruiting table with, all the stuff and the gadgets. And I remember asking my dad at the time, hey, do you think I can join the Army? And I was 10 years old. He's like, yeah, maybe next year. I'm like, okay. So that was probably my first introduction, but I didn't have anything really serious until high school. But I opted out to just kind of pursue university career or university first. And after about a year of university, I decided it wasn't right for me at that time. And then I went looking. So ended up.
And was that with the support of your family?
Oh, I would love to tell you yes. However, just to provide a little bit of context, it was in the middle of a war that had already begun and one that was starting up.
Yeah.
So to give kind of the cultural context of that, I would say that there was a lot of shock, especially around the holidays. Ultimately, though, my family was supportive and of my career or my time in the military. But looking back on it now, it's definitely something where I can say that they were definitely concerned about my safety and everything, as most families would be.
Yeah. And do you think that the fact that there was a war or was ongoing impacted your decision to enlist?
I definitely would say it did to a point. I can't say for certain if there had been a war or not at the time, if I would have joined. It's a great what if on my end. But as far as something that was kind of motivating in terms of choosing to join, because in the United States, service is optional. Okay, it's not required or mandated as it used to be out in various parts of Europe. So, one thing that really motivated me was this idea of, maybe for lack of better words and my naivety at the time, but it was just to kind of do the right thing and to be able to give a break to those that were already out there.
The focus of the book is your deployment with 1st Battalion, 4th Infantry Regiment. Is that who you spend the majority or spent all of your military career with, or was there rotations?
There was definitely rotation. So 1-4 Infantry was one of the units that I served with. It was the unit that I spent the majority of my time in Afghanistan with. So I would say definitely the foundational aspect of combat and deploying.
A good place to start would be to just give people an overview of the book and its genesis. Perhaps you could just, before we dive into what's come up from reading it, because it is a fantastic read, give us a bit of an overview of the premise of the book, how you organized it, and how it came to be.
Yeah, definitely. So the premise of the book, Mortal Men, Immortal Warriors. When I left service and I decided to return to academia, one of the nice things about the university that I'm at, for students, if there's a club that doesn't exist or something you kind of want to start up, it's highly encouraged. And at that time, I had noticed that there wasn't anything related to book publishing or writing or helping people develop their talents, not just for writing, but also for formatting, editing, designing, etc. Just the whole process of publication. Mortal Men and Mortal Warriors, this was one of the ideas that was pitched by some of the students that were in the club at the time. And they said, well, what if we reach out and see if anybody has any stories? We can kind of collate these stories, kind of bring history to life from a non-academic or a non-journalistic perspective. And yeah, that's kind of what kick-started the journey towards gathering these stories from soldiers who had served in 1-4 Infantry, some of whom I had served with, others who had served maybe before or after my time. And one of the interesting things about it is that 1-4 Infantry is actually the longest continually serving unit in the Army in Afghanistan, nearly 7 continuous years.
Wow.
Of course, we all rotated out and everything.
Yeah.
But there was always a presence for about 7 years. So a lot to draw from.
And what's the receptivity to a project like this, both with the soldiers that you served with and those who came before and after you and the military itself?
I would say that the reception of it was mixed, generally pretty optimistic or interested. So I had to go through some of the proper channels to actually get permission to collate these stories and everything. After I got the permission to do that, both individually and also from the Army, we started gathering stories, and we spent a little over 2 years gathering stories, going back and forth with the editing process, because everybody is different parts of the world, different parts of their careers, or they finished their service. It was definitely a challenge not knowing anything about the publishing world and how to go into that, and definitely rewarding. So I would say overall, it was well received. And I even had one of the soldiers that I served with, he was one of our medics. And he said that at that time, it was a bit serendipitous. He was speaking with a counselor about how to process trauma, how to deal with grief and things like that. And the counselor at the time said, you know what, maybe start writing your stories down.
Wow.
And it just happened to be that at that time, I was pitching this idea to my fellow veterans, said, hey, would anybody mind sharing some of your stories to kind of provide these perspectives? So I would say that there were definitely a few unintentional good consequences that came from the book.
Yeah. And I'll include the link to the book in the show notes. It is a super interesting read, because I guess a lot of military literature, certainly that I've come across, is either very historical in nature. This happened and this happened and this happened, or obviously sort of quite dramatic. This is an anthology of almost reflections and diaries from various soldiers who were there, and soldiers who are reflecting on a particular battle from different standpoints, different viewpoints that they saw. So it is really, reading it, it feels, very raw, very real. What was it like to put that together and sort of have these stories coming into you?
I mean, the idea of it being raw wasn't exactly planned from the beginning, because I would say with most books or most publications, you think of a polished product, you remove everything. But as the stories came in and everything, we kind of realized that there was a certain value in just kind of connecting on a human level by leaving it raw, kind of sharing those emotions the way that particular soldiers experience those situations. And as more stories came in, for example, there's one part of the book where we took one of the events that happened where, unfortunately, we lost a few soldiers to improvised explosive device. And that story, it was even something that I didn't know until we started gathering. And it was the same story, but from different perspectives happening at the same time, different vantage points. So yeah, it was, it was a bit surreal to kind of uncover some of those things, even if you experience it.
Did it uncover new memories or emotions of your own time in Afghanistan?
For a little bit. For example, in this book, I purposely chose not to include any of my direct stories, because just the wealth of information that came in, and I mean, it's kind of a lengthy book, hitting almost 300 pages. But yeah, I can tell you, for example, the one incident where we lost soldiers due to the explosive device. I remember exactly where I was, and I remember everything from my perspective. In that instant, it was actually one of those things where we actually were switched out at the last second to go kind of babysit or kind of secure a site where there was a supposed bomb that somebody had seen. And we ended up switching out priorities that day. So the group that took our position to go receive the mail and everything that day and drive out, they're the ones that hit the explosive. Well, we went the other way. So yeah, I mean, these stories, they kind of, yeah, there's a personal aspect that you can connect with, I would say, and yeah, definitely reflective.
Yeah, I'm sure. And look, there's many themes that came up from the book when I was reading it, but one of the most striking is this sort of rhythm of military life, right? You have these sort of pockets of chaos and action that come through really vividly in the narratives from the soldiers, and surrounded by like just boredom, right? And the
Yeah.
camaraderie that comes with both of those situations. And guys will talk about spending days, not really doing too much. Like, paint a bit of a picture of that for us, and I guess how did you experience that rhythm yourself?
Yeah, I mean, probably for lack of a better explanation, it's a good thing, I would say, that it wasn't continuous high intensity or continuous low intensity. In terms of that kind of fluctuation of the energies, if I'm to oversimplify it, that's all it was. It was just the most simple schedule you could have. Wake up, do your job, go back to sleep.
Yeah,
Wake up, do your job. So kind of that repetition and getting into that mindset and everything every day. I mean, it just kind of became part of you. Like, I even lost track of the days of the week myself. Sometimes I'd have to look at a calendar, but yeah, I think that rhythm, though, if we think about it emotionally and everything, a lot of my service, especially with, well, I'd say maybe on all of my deployments, I functioned a little bit more robotically. I say just input command, tell me what to do. All right, decompress, restart. So maybe not the healthiest at the time, looking back reflectively, but it might have also that kind of fluctuation between monotony and intensity and how I approached it. That might have been something that also kind of shielded my own mental health and things like that. I might never know. Probably a researcher much smarter than myself will shed some light.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's interesting, the sense I got from reading it, and maybe you can tell me if this is accurate or not, is that different guys and the group itself sort of found a way to regulate what it needed. When you'd read it, and some guys would spend their spare time, I don't know, like finding parts to work on the vehicles they needed to work on. Others would spend it, in the coffee shop when it was available. Others would spend it sitting in their bunks reading. Others would spend it, giving each other shit, right? And I wonder if there was a sense of, people knew, even if not in a way that was optimal from a mental health perspective, how to regulate and get what they needed to some extent.
Oh, I definitely think so. I think that for most soldiers, finding an outlet that worked for them, I think that that's a crucial part of actually going through that, the fluctuation of monotony to high intensity. There needs to be somewhere to put that extra energy or that extra thought, whatever that might be. And yeah, like you said, uh, different soldiers found different ways, different outlets and everything to express themselves or to kind of get those things off their chest. For example, it's not just restricted to the military, but dark humor is, a very powerful outlet for people to cope with, traumatic or, intense situations, things like this. And yeah, we weren't in any short supply of dark humor, for example.
Yeah, that comes through as well, and I guess that combination of dark humor, really unique action, and then just being in each other's company at all times. This sort of band of brothers, for want of a better phrase, develops. And there was many quotes throughout the book, but one that stuck out to me when I think his name was Barry Lesnick was talking about challenges that he'd had, saying, the only family that stayed with me were my brothers in his time, referring, of course, to the soldiers that he served with. Can you speak to that a little bit and the sense of brotherhood that developed?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe just in a general sense, a type of bond that is formed through military service. And you might see this in other jobs, such as police officers or firefighters, for example, jobs that require a great deal of mental fortitude, especially in the military when soldiers, or I don't want to just be exclusive to say soldiers, but when a service member becomes a veteran, there is a change of pace in life. And sometimes that might be very difficult to adapt to, going from one environment to this civilian environment that might not understand the context of your own experiences. And I think, for example, with Barry Lesnick's quote about how family, the only family that stayed were his brothers. I mean, that speaks to the military bond. You have a group of military members who have experienced an event or multiple events together, and that common shared experience. That's something that, maybe for lack of better words, it's a burden that's not only carried individually, but you also know that it's carried with others with whom you served. So I think that forms an extremely strong bond.
Mm. Was it consistent that bond continued when everyone returned home?
I mean, I can't speak to everybody, but for myself, for example, when we started gathering stories for the books, or for the book, one of the great things about it was that we did get to reconnect with a lot of people who we kind of lost contact with. So maybe you were in contact with one person and they were in contact with another. So they invited them to our Facebook group so that we could kind of talk. And the group of soldiers who deployed from 1-4 Infantry, I don't have an exact number, but it's a rather small number because it was a lot of soldiers who completed multiple deployments with the unit. So that number is small already. And when we talk about those kind of connections after service, some people just disappear into the civilian world. Other people stay well connected. I think it kind of gets into what our identity becomes or how we see our identity post service. And I think that that might be a big influence on actually how connected we stay. Myself, for example, I can go a long time without directly speaking to a lot of the guys, but we can just kind of pick up where we left off and catch each other up on, oh, this was the last 5 years. Here's what happened. And it's like that.
That makes sense. And I guess, it's perhaps not surprising in the sense that, there's people existing on many ends of the social spectrum in terms of what they need from the groups around them. And this group is no different in that respect, but it's just what you've gone through to get there is a bit more extreme. And that makes me, there was one other quote that I really wanted to discuss with you on this topic, which is from Stephen Doc Price, one of the medics, and he was talking about a sort of memorial service that was happening, and he says, we mourned as best we could manage, but we still had work to do. You can't really stop in an environment like a war zone and cope with your emotions. You wind up bottling them up, pushing them aside, and drive on to the next mission, the next objective. Like, how common was that experience, as far as you can tell?
I mean, I would venture to say that it's a pretty common experience for military members that experience those types of traumatic events. Specifically with that event, I remember coming back after we'd switched out, and my group was actually the last to find out, and they purposely kind of kept us in the dark until we got back there. And after we got back, I don't remember if it'd been a couple days or something like this. It'd been over 24 hours, I think. And yeah, when we got back, I kind of noticed it was oddly quiet, and we didn't have like a group of people saying, "Hey, how's it going, man?" And I was like, this is just weird. We caught everybody in like some off time or whatever. Okay. And yeah, when you kind of get hit with that, for example, with Doc Price, he was right there. He was in the thick of it. I can't speak to his situation directly, but to be directly in an event, that's a whole nother experience. And I think bottling it up, it's part of it is coping, but there's also necessity just given the environment. These great things that we have now, like self-care or mindfulness, which are amazing. They're not always a luxury that in combat you can use or even afford to have time.
And I guess presumably, talking nearly 20 years ago now, or over 20 years ago now, since you joined the Army, like the dialogue around those things is massively different as well.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's taken a turn for the better, and I'm very happy about that. There's a lot of things that when I served, and undoubtedly even before I served, especially when it comes to mental health, it was almost non-existent. Like, for example, in my field as a cavalry scout, so just to kind of explain what that role is, it's a reconnaissance role. Scouts are the type of soldiers that you would send out just to gather information, say, okay, we need you to go here and come back with information about this. When soldiers, when we're in a combat zone and we experience the loss of, our fellow soldiers, especially if they're within one of our near groups, like a platoon-sized element, they would send out psychologists, some of the medical professionals, to come and speak with us for a little bit to kind of help us process what had happened. Again, those visits were kind of short. The idea was like, okay, patch it up, get back out. But flash forward maybe 20 years later, I think that, on the civilian and the military side, this idea of mental health awareness and being able to get help, and that, mental health is physical health, and all these different things. I'm actually very happy for it, because I come from a time where, as soldiers, you bottled it up, or you pushed through the pain, whether it's physical or mental, because the mission came first. And yeah, I'm much happier today, and I'm very supportive of soldiers and veterans going out and seeking those resources, that are available, and actually advocating for hopefully more resources like that to be available, because it's an important part of the healing process, I think.
And is there a recognition for doing that in a way that doesn't lose those virtues that allowed you to perform in the toughest of environments, to push through when you needed to push through? Because I think sometimes there is a conversation that is, it has to be one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have something that puts more focus on having positive mental health outcomes if you don't then trade off some of the other grit, for want of a better phrase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if we look at mental health versus mission, and we view it maybe as a zero sum game, where you can only conduct one or the other. I think maybe the balancing act between that is maybe on the recovery side of it. So after you complete a mission, uh, after you finish something, okay, here's part of the aftercare that you're going to go through. So not to dehumanize it, but maybe just to show it in another perspective, or from another perspective. We take the time to work on a car. A car has an issue. We change the oil. We change the tires. You upgrade a computer. Uh, you know, your animal gets sick. You take it to the vet. So we have all these things where we're going in that direction of care. And I think it's just a matter of, you have to break down some barriers in order for military and other things, other organizations such as that, to be more receptive. So I can give you a very relevant example that personally impacted me and others. And I didn't even know the story until I left service. I actually found out the story a couple years ago.
Okay.
There's a really good movie. It's called Concussion. It has Will Smith, and I just randomly was scrolling through and found it. I'm like, okay, I'll put this on in the background. I watched it, and I learned that because of this one doctor, that's why we actually have a lot of these concussion protocols now.
Yeah.
And it was because somebody really took a passion to it, and it wasn't an instant changeover. There was a lot of reluctance and pushback, a lot to discredit this doctor. But eventually, and kind of sadly, when, for lack of better words, the right person passed on, then there was more attention given. And I think that's something that's also in terms of helping with recovery for military members, or even if we look at the civilian population, for lack of better words, sometimes the right person or needs to be injured or hurt, for an alarm or for some type of awareness. And I think if we can find a way to maybe circumvent that, that might be a more proactive step in the future to even building on what we have now.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I'd like to shift the focus now a little bit to, I guess, time after the war and time home. And at the end of the book, you sort of ask soldiers variations of the same question, and one of the questions was around how the deployment had changed them. And my sense was there was a sort of split between those who'd come home and were stuck in sort of high alert mode, hypervigilant. They talk about never sitting with their back to a door, or constantly being worried they were going to drive over IEDs, to others who had found some purpose perhaps, and were coming home feeling, positive about the experience, or not positive about the experiences they had, but that they had changed for the better as a result of the experiences they had. Do you recognize that split, and if so, like, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that everybody does change after a deployment. I was probably a naive denier of that before I deployed. It was a friend of mine at the time that was very concerned for me to deploy. Said, "Oh, you're going to come back changed." I'm like, "No, I won't. I'll be the same old me." Very naively speaking. But yeah, when we talk about those evolutions, those changes in who we are as people post deployment, there are a lot of different paths that people can take, towards their own journey to their next chapter, and some are definitely a little bit darker than others. For example, in our own unit and everything in the 1-4 Infantry, it was after we had put out the book. Unfortunately, one of our fellow veterans ended up taking his own life, not related to the book or anything. This is something that's, I don't want to say it's common, but it is prevalent post-service. When veterans have difficulty dealing with their own experiences. And sometimes our demons get the better of us. And for those who find purpose, on the other side of that, there's a lot of people who have found a way to take their traumas or take their experiences and kind of use those as a foundation or a stepping stone to where they want to go, how they want to change or be. And yeah, I wish I had some kind of wisdom to explain, why it is or how we can predict how it happens. I can't. I'm not a soothsayer or anything like that. But yeah.
How do you think about your own journey since you've returned?
My own journey, I would say that I have the benefit of reflection, and that reflection grows as the years grow as well. Probably closer to leaving service. I still had this military mentality. All right, I got to get up early. I got to accomplish this. This is how we do things. The further I go along and the more I grow post-service, being able to look back on things with different perspectives or an improved perspective, a more full perspective, is that we can kind of look back and just, appreciate the experiences that we went through. So for myself, I can see a lot of these experiences and, I kind of look back, and at the time I kind of compared it to a casino. You went in, it's high stakes, there's all these rushes of emotions, but eventually the casino, is all good casino, the house always wins, as the saying goes. So you can only, tempt fate so much. And, when I look back at it now, I think it's quite miraculous that I survived a lot of the things that we did. But I don't let that hold me down or anything, because that's something that's in the past, and even though it won't disappear, it's in the past. It's not the present. So for me, it's not my current identity, but it's a prior identity. That's how I can separate it. And for myself, I look at it this way: if we break a bone or something, the bone grows back stronger. That's part of the healing process. And I think, at least for myself, that's kind of how it is. Processing the types of trauma that you might experience through combat service. For me, I know that there's probably not much that I can't make it through. And, that's what we call resilience, I guess, the ability to push through. And I'm actually quite happy. It was most recently, so here at the university, students deal with a lot of different stressors. And so this is also an important part for us to focus on, just kind of shift it, but to compare it. And so we brought in some mental health professionals to kind of give us some tips, answer questions, things like this. And one of the things that they brought up, without knowing that I'd served in the military, they brought up this idea of resilience, and like how in the military and other environments, resilience is seen as this very positive attribute. You need to be resilient. And it's true, but they also said that resilience is also supposed to be very short term. You can't constantly be resilient, because you're really going to just wear yourself down. So there has to be a stopping point. And I hadn't actually thought about that until they brought it up. I'm like, oh, wow, I really do need to slow down on some things, for example, or not push through. It's okay to not push through something. So, long story short, I think with my own experiences, I use them to kind of shape who I am today, and hopefully who I will be in the future when I get there. But it's not without any kind of loss, let's say. So maybe one way I would kind of sum it up, so I don't keep talking too long. I kind of look at it this way, that when you serve during war, there is going to be something of yourself that you lose, but there's also going to be something that you're going to use to replace that. So I think sometimes we can have that choice of what do we use to replace or fill in what we lost. So if I look at something realistic, you lose your peers. They're killed, they're injured. That's a loss that you'll carry with you, and you can leave that hole open for a long time, or you can fill it with, for example, positive memory, or keeping their name alive, years later. So, for example, a lot of us, we still keep in contact with the widows of some of the soldiers that we served with, and things like that. So, yeah, I think it's a matter of what we patch ourselves up with, or what we use to complete ourselves a little bit to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said, and it speaks a little bit to what we were saying earlier. When you were saying resilience being there in a short burst, or up to a point. It's kind of what we said, where actually you can display all of those traits of courage and conviction and grit, and without losing those when the time is right. Pause, look after yourself, do what you need to do to make sure that you can draw on the well of those convictions when you need to again.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the things that I would say is that out of the many tools that we have as human beings, so not just to limit it to men or anything like this, but just human beings in general, there's a lot of tools that we have to help us through different situations, and sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right tool for the right situation. So, you kind of, there are certain things that may have been more appropriate during military service that might not translate necessarily to, civilian life. So I think it's just finding those things.
The focus of this podcast really, I did want it to be on the soldier stories, and of course on the masculinity that comes through from that. But there is a part of the book where, again, in this interview section, you ask them about how their views of war had changed. I thought it would be remiss not to at least acknowledge that, because there was some I guess loss of trust in institutions, or perhaps people have become a bit not conspiratorial, but I guess reflective on the news and the news cycle. And one said, you realize the news is no different than the propaganda we used to put out. And I guess we're at an interesting time in the world politically right now. What does that say about how veterans experience, media, politics, having been quite literally in the front lines of it?
Yeah, I think having a front row seat to history, I think that definitely impacts how we process things. And touching on the idea of propaganda and, the one veteran, what they said, I think it's something that I wouldn't realize until later in life now. And I think it's something that's maybe generational with veterans. So, for example, when I first enlisted, I remember the first veteran that I ran into in the processing station. And gosh, he must have been about 40 or something at the time. And I was just a young guy. And he's like, oh, don't do this, don't do this. This is how it is. And, I didn't have the appreciation for his perspective at the time, but I think it's one of the things that growing as a human being, veterans, we can have a perspective of the world, and maybe it's a different of perception versus reality. And I think some veterans might choose to see like what they view the world really is. It's such a good question that you ask. It really is, and probably talk forever on it. But I mean, maybe it kind of goes something similar to the old adage that war is for young men to die and old men to reminisce about. It's kind of like who gets picked for what. And when we look at this concept of propaganda, for example, like maybe just to provide the listeners some context and everything. Like if you look at that time of joining the military, like in the United States, I would say patriotism and togetherness was at an all-time high. I don't think I've seen anything like that, even growing up. Even as a kid, I hadn't seen that. So I think it's important that we look at these current wars, for example. We look at them through the lens of a current context, matching a proper context with a proper time.
So I guess having the experiences that you've had, and I guess now, working in journalism, like how do you process global conflict now?
Yeah, so especially with a journalistic perspective, because I'm not a naturally trained or organically trained journalist. I just kind of happened into it. It's an interesting blend, having a military background and then journalism, and I also have diplomatic training. So how I try to approach things is I try to find a very objective viewpoint. So just answering the who, what, where, when, why, these kind of questions. And you'll never run out of questions. But sometimes it's kind of limiting them or focusing them, I might say. So when we talk about some of these current, I'll say conflicts and wars to be inclusive, because for me, words have power. So I don't want to use the wrong verbiage or anything like this. So, for example, I would call it the war in Ukraine versus a conflict in Ukraine, because from a journalistic perspective and, even maybe from a military perspective, kind of going back on that idea of propaganda, things like this, it's all how we frame things, really. And, just in life, if you frame something as a conflict, it doesn't seem as bad as if you frame it as a war. If you restrict seeing images, gruesome images of bodies and death, if you restrict this, it provides a different perspective of how people view or, understand conflicts and wars and things like this. So, in terms of how I process it, I find that one of the challenges is trying to meet the necessity of what people need to know and what you need to protect people from. And maybe I could say that from my own military experience. There's probably lots of military stories I would love to share, but at the same time, it might not be so appropriate or understood in a proper context. So you have to shield people from those type of stories. But, when we look at what's going on now in the world, Ukraine, Gaza, even in Iran right now, and Israel. So there's a lot that's heating up and everything. And you kind of see what I might attribute to kind of how people are processing the content of war. So we look at our motivations of why we're having these conversations, or like what do we want to emphasize. So, for example, some people might be trying to just generate views for videos without actually discussing the underlying questions that are in that situation. Or, there's sometimes there's a lot of well-intentioned but misinformed uh, people who try to speak on, these global conflicts that we have in Ukraine, Gaza, etc. So I would say that a lot of processing this, like maybe how my own lens has shifted, is maybe the best way I can kind of say it is when I first got into journalism, there was an editor that I worked with, and one of the things that she told me to kind of help me out was that just because you're objective doesn't mean you don't take a side. And it really stuck with me. And, drawing on that, like being objective, showing fact is fact. You can still take a side, and I think that you should still take a side, because I think that, if we only show one side of anything, even if it's completely good and positive and it's all correct, you're still missing out on the fuller picture. You're not showing the complete puzzle, that the complexity of everything. So yeah, my lens would shift towards the need for multiple perspectives in reporting, and even connecting with viewers or readers, the people who engage with this kind of content. We have to think about that as well. If that kind of answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, you've got quite a unique perspective, I think, and if what comes from that is being mindful of, even when we're trying to be objective, taking a side, and also being mindful of, the complexity and the difficulty in being able to present a picture. Like, I think if that's what we take from that, I think that's good advice for anyone at a time where it can be very easy to intentionally or unintentionally only consume the narrative you want to consume, that you already agree with, and just get angry at other people, basically. So
Yeah, I mean, yeah, escaping the echo chamber, as it were. I think that that's an important thing. Um, yeah, it's a very important thing to escape our own echo chambers, because that also shows that you know we have the understanding that our own perspective could be misinformed or incorrect. So yes.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I'm mindful of time, and there's we could keep going for some time here, but I guess I just wanted to understand a little bit about where we find you today, and what brought you to Bulgaria, and I guess what does that mean for you in terms of the way you see America, or the masculinity that you experienced, serving in the U.S. Army. Now that you have some cultural distance, so yeah, tell us about what brought you to Bulgaria, and where we find you today.
Yeah. So what brought me to Bulgaria, for lack of better words, was an accident.
Okay.
I have, yeah. So I was, as I was preparing to transition from the military, I wanted to return to academia, and I decided that I would just start all over again.
Yeah.
And in the military, most of my time I was stationed out of Germany, so I had already spent a good portion of my time there, and I'd already been kind of gone from the United States for a very long time. So as everybody else moved forward, I still had these old memories and from when I'd left. So to say that there was some distance in time in everything, I think that wouldn't be too far off. So I was looking for maybe something kind of familiar, but also something where I could, continue to push on and everything, and start the next chapter. So I ended up doing a little bit of research into what I wanted to study and the language I wanted to study in, which is English. So that was kind of limiting a little bit, but I found a university out here. I looked on a map. I,
Okay.
I looked on a map. I'm like, oh, okay. And yeah, I decided I had a lot of holidays saved up as I was preparing to leave from the military, and I decided to visit out here in Bulgaria, and I saw it was a real place, a real university, real people, amazing talent that was coming in, and amazing talent that was already here, and yeah, that kind of really informed my decision to kind of pursue this. And I can't say that I had initially planned to stay in Bulgaria. I don't think I had thought that far forward at the time, but yeah, here I am,
Yeah.
11, 12 years later, and I'm here. This is home for me now, and yeah, this is where my next chapters and everything are unfolding. So that's one thing I'm very appreciative for, and yeah, in terms of maybe how I can see masculinity. I don't want to speak poorly of my host country here of Bulgaria, but there's a large difference in how mental health and masculinity, especially in Bulgaria, compared to the United States and other parts of the world, how it's viewed. So here in Bulgaria, we have a word, batko. In American English, we might say gym rat. I'm not quite sure how it would be in British English,
Yeah.
but basically someone who spends all their time on muscles and other time on books.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's not the complete culture by any means, but it is at least a certain part of the culture here. And yeah, masculinity here in Bulgaria, maybe it might be a bit more patriarchal than other parts of the world. So for me, that's kind of an interesting thing to still be part of, while I've seen it kind of phase out or phase away in other parts of the world where I've lived. But it doesn't make it a bad thing either, because I think even in Bulgaria, now we're kind of at a turning point where I kind of see like a turn of different generations. So, for example, this younger generation, they're more apt to seek out mental health proactively rather than reactively, which I think is amazing. So, yeah, there's a lot of good that's here as well. So I like kind of being on the forefront of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a sort of cultural barometer for how things are in America that you rely on?
Oh, cultural barometer. Oof. Well, I would say just the different media that are from the United States. I tend to take a viewpoint of media organizations actually more as a barometer, or just a gauge of public opinion. So regardless of what they're reporting on, you could probably see how well people interact with different types of stories, and I think that kind of gives you a glimpse into the general feeling. So, for example, I just came back from the United States, and although my trip was pretty pretty relaxing overall, I still got to see and engage in different conversations. There's still a lot of people that might feel hurt or left out. Regardless of politics, I'll say, but you know, I get the idea that there's a great chasm of between thought and discussion. Regardless of political identity or philosophical identity. I think that maybe in the United States right now, there's just a very broad gap that might be putting a barrier up for people. Instead of having conversations with each other, people are just speaking at each other, if that makes sense. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, a little bit of a polarization of sorts.
Yeah, 100%. And well, I mean, it's not the only place it's happening, but yeah, again, I think if we can get a few more people talking to each other, that's probably good advice. And no, on the topic of sort of new media, if we fling it back to old media, like you've written this great book, like are there other books you think people could read to understand the military better or themselves better?
Oh, absolutely. And I have to say that this is probably one of the most interesting or favorite questions I have. Because I ask this of everybody also, like just
Great.
regardless, like, hey, let me know a book that really impacts you.
Yeah.
So one that really it still impacts me to this day. It's called Legionnaire by Simon Murray. So if I remember correctly, Simon Murray was a British expat. I don't know where he is these days, but it's his story of his time in the French Foreign Legion, and the way he starts it out is that he's not trying to convince you one way or the other. He's just telling you this is how it was, and you make up your own mind after that. And that's kind of an approach I think I really appreciate towards understanding the military. It's it's one of those things that people that talk about, well, should we serve, should we not serve, and the way I might explain it, kind of to borrow a little bit from him, is people are built for different things, and once we realize that we all have different roles. Some can serve well in the military, some can serve well in civilian jobs or governmental, diplomatic, be artists. There's something out there for everybody. And I would definitely suggest reading Legionnaire by Simon Murray. It's a pretty good read.
Nice. We'll add that to the list, and I'll put it in the show notes. And I guess just finally then, like, what's your message to men who are struggling to make peace with their past for whatever reason?
Yeah. Probably part of what my message would be is that I'll start with a cliche and then I'll build off of it. The first part is to realize that you're not alone in your struggle. This was something that was maybe particularly difficult for myself to kind of understand when I was in the military and even when I left. A lot of times we think that our experiences are so unique to ourselves. They're personal, but they're not necessarily unique. And I think that having that differentiation is an important part towards being able to repair or heal ourselves. And even using words like that, repair or heal or evolve, adapt, opening up our perspective to understand that the different ways that we explain things, it's not a bad thing to go out and seek help. It's not because we're messed up. It's not because, a negative reason. There's a positive benefit toward going out there and talking with others, having discussions, even listening to a podcast or, speaking back and forth with you. This is a beneficial form of communication. So I think for men out there, for those of you that are listening to this, I would say one thing that we can all do collectively is, work on trying to improve our communication skills. Communication is important in a lot of things, whether we're healing or growing, things like this. And I think it's also when we talk about masculinity, kind of going back to something you previously touched on, just to remember masculinity and empathy, these aren't zero-sum things. They can coexist and they should exist. There's a few different writers or a few different books, let's say, throughout time that have kind of had the message that, there's a time for grieving, there's a time for happiness, there's a time to act, a time to sit back. Just kind of realizing that as men, we do carry, there are a lot of burdens that we're going to carry that, kind of come with the territory. But, take some time. It's okay to reflect, to sit, to talk. And, even if something like that, if speaking doesn't work for you, seek out another outlet. For example, writing, and I'm obviously very biased
Yeah.
in this area, as that's what I do. I help students with writing, and I help other writers develop their craft. But I'll tell you one thing, and I don't know if I'm looking directly in the camera right now or not, but I'll try to. Seek out writing, even just for yourself. It's an amazing thing. One of the projects that I'm working on right now, which I'm a believer that when we write, our stories tell themselves. So rather than the other way around. And yeah, one of the projects I'm working on right now, which actually deals with mental health. I don't want to go too much into it, but it's taking the different forms of poetry to explore our mind and to kind of create an individual experience for every reader. So again, reflective, but like things that we might overlook. And as I've gone through this, or as I'm going through this right now, going through manuscripts and everything, I even have students helping with different things from illustrations to some of the research. And even I'm unlocking things that I hadn't thought of before. And this is one thing that I also encourage men out there. Keep seeking opportunities for growth. I mean, you will not be disappointed, because the moment that we become stagnant is the moment, a rock is still living, but it doesn't move, and yeah, seek out these opportunities. And, whether it's conversation with other men, or, finding an activity, a hobby that's interesting for you, find that outlet and, really engage with it. I think that that's what I would say.
Yeah. No, it's good advice. Like whether it's finding someone or a group of people that you can speak with, whether it's finding a different outlet that is just for you. Like we need something. I think if people can get somewhat close to following that advice, they'll feel a massive benefit. So look, finally, where can people get the book? Where can they follow your work? What do you want to direct people towards?
Yeah. So in terms of the book, you can find the book on Amazon, I believe. So you can just go on Amazon, whichever country it is, where you're from. You just type in Mortal Men, Immortal Warriors. You'll find the book there. If for some reason you don't want to pay, or you just want it easy, reach out to me. But I'm more than happy to try to find a copy, get a copy in your hands. In terms of following work, you can always check out on the journalistic side of things. I'm an editor for an online news site in the United States. It's called the NYC Daily Post. So you can just go to www.nycdailypost.com. What we have there, we cover a lot of stories from across the world, a lot of different perspectives. And what I would say is a little bit different than most media. We work more with developing writers who might not even be natural journalists or trained journalists. So, that might even be my call to action. If you've ever doubted, or you've had an interest in, writing a column, reach out to me. You can reach out to me via our email. It's communications@nycdailypost.com. You can reach out to me there. If you're interested in writing an article, I'd be happy to work with you. And then in terms of just reaching out to me more directly, I'm not quite sure what you'll put on your podcast or anything, or if I should just send you a good email address.
Yeah. I'll have some show notes, so we can put any links in there as well. But if there's anything you want to draw attention
I'll put some social links in there.
Yeah. Perfect. Good stuff. Well, look, Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I encourage everyone to get a hold of the book. It really, for me, I like to think I have dived into a bit of military history and literature over the years, but this was a really unique experience that I really enjoyed in terms of truly understanding, I think, what the day-to-day life of soldiering is about. So it was great. Thank you for compiling that anthology, and for carrying on with the work you're doing.
Awesome. Well, hey, I just want to say thank you very much, Tim, for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to seeing some more of your podcasts and everything out there as you're kind of helping men find these positive outlets and everything. So, really thank you for what you're doing.
No worries. Appreciate it. Good stuff, Stephen.
All right.
If you got something from today's episode, as always, please do me a favor, like and subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. That's how this is going to grow. Man by man, episode by episode, all of us doing our part to reclaim masculinity and show up right in the world. Head over to thefeelgoodfolk.com to learn more about coaching, community, and the content that we're sharing. Thanks again for listening. Work hard, be kind, and I'll catch you at the next one.